Petitions, we have none. Public input, we had 3 requests. Kristen Eek from the Screen Industries Sites of Significance has been referred to the Planning Committee. Grey Power North Shore's Bill Reiner has also been deferred, and Mr Wilson is going to be talking to Mr Reiner. And that's the only request we've had, Sandra. That's right, thank you. And the request that has been accepted is from the Auckland War Memorial Museum. And I'd like to welcome David, and I see Penny there as well, and James. So we'll pass over to, I'll let you start. Penny, you're a board member, so maybe let you start, then hand on to Mr Gainster. Thank you. In your hands, Penny.
Oh, kia ora. Tēnā koutou rangatira mā. What an absolute pleasure it is to see everybody, dear friends and colleagues. And Mr Deputy Mayor, good to see you in that seat. The coup appears to have been brief because the Mayor's back. So, Your Worship, kia ora koutou katoa, and I hope the announcements were good. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and as you said, Mr Deputy Mayor, I've got James Dill, our Museum Stakeholder Relation Manager, who's well known to everybody, and David Gamester, our Museum's Chief Executive, with me today. So just a few remarks from me to open up. I've also got apologies from Richard Bedford, our wonderful museum chair, who was very sorry not to be with us today. So I'm here in my role as the chair of the planning committee for the museum, and I'll just be very, very brief. So first of all, a deep and heartfelt thank you from the museum to Council and the ratepayers of Tamaki Makaurau for the ongoing support to the museum. Without that, we would be nothing. We're grateful for your public funding, which is absolutely critical to our ability to deliver for Aucklanders and enables us to do what we do for our communities and to run as a museum. We, however, recognise the council difficulties that you're facing at the moment. Finances are tough, and we understand because we share many of the same issues and the cost rises that council's facing at the moment. The museum has had the same levy funding since 2019-20, and we were seeking a small increase for the next financial year. A month ago, however, we met with the Mayor, and the Mayor asked us to reduce our levy back down to the same 0% levy increase as the previous 3 years. And we agreed to do this for the sake of our relationship with the Council, out of respect to Auckland ratepayers and in a deep commitment to serving our community. And Mr Mayor, we thank you and the Rangatira Group for the meetings and the very honest discussions. The Trust Board is clear, however, that we cannot continue this course beyond the next financial year, and we're signalling now that levy increases will absolutely be required in the following years to ensure that the museum's debt and deficit are not run any further and that debt is serviceable. And even with the indicative increases signalled in the revised plan, it'll be a long, slow recovery and exactly the same issues as I said at the beginning that Council's facing. But with some small correction in our annual public funding settlements, the deficit and debt will continue to increase unsustainably if we can't secure an increase in the future. I'd also like to just comment really positively on the process that we've gone through with Council. Despite the financial circumstances, the process and the relationship with Council during the preparation of this annual plan have been really positive, and we want to thank again the staff and the politicians involved in this, and we're really committed to moving forward in planning for the future of our wonderful museum together. As one of our board members put it, the Tamaki Paenga, our wonderful Auckland Museum, is the beating heart of our cultural community in Tamaki Makaurau, and we don't want to lose that. So I'll now hand over to our Chief Executive, David Gamester, for more detail and to take any questions. Kia ora. Thanks, David.
Kia ora, thank you, Penny. Atamarie me gof. Morena koutou katoa. I'll just say a little more about the financial circumstances of the museum and the implications of this levy settlement. As Penny noted, we've reduced our levy request back to what we received in each of the previous 3 years. We estimate that in real terms, and if you adjust for inflation, that represents an 11% reduction in our levy funding for 22-23. That's based on the 2019-20 levy. I think it's fair to say we're beginning to run out of road. The next financial year, our debt and operating deficit will be at the absolute limit of what is prudent and serviceable. We will have absolutely no more room for manoeuvre should there be any further shocks to the system. We're projecting a deficit of almost $8 million, and this will reduce slowly in the outer years, only if the levy rate begins to rise again sustainably. The indicated rates for the outer years in our draft annual plan represent really a keystone in our business recovery plan. If the currently static levy rate is not corrected at this level, the deficit and the debt will become unsustainable. We'll be forced to make further substantial reductions to core services. And so for this reason, we're indicating 3% levy increases in each of the 2 outer years. We believe this correction is both responsible and also prudent. A sustainable level of public funding is critical for the museum to run in line with our communities and our visitors' expectations and aspirations. Without it, our exhibitions and our public offering will fall behind, and we will be out of step with society. We continue to keep a very tight lid on costs, and we're looking everywhere for new revenue. But the pandemic is still affecting us adversely. We've got an excellent engagement with Auckland communities and strong visitation, but our local visitors only generate modest revenue. International tourists have always been our most profitable segment. Their ongoing absence remains a key limiting factor in our self-generated revenue. At the same time, we're seeing more demands and increased expectations from the communities we serve. Next year is going to be pretty tough. Because of this lower levy, we'll be forced to defer much needed work to renewing our galleries. We're going to have to defer that work for a further 12 months. And some of those galleries are now, of course, over 20 years old, and the display collections are becoming increasingly at risk. We'll have to resequence other urgent asset renewals and suspend a number of major public programs. Of course, to retain key staff, we're planning a modest increase to salaries, but these, I fear, will be well outstripped by inflation. Retaining and recruiting staff, key staff, was already difficult, and now this is an absolutely critical risk. I'd like to finish on a much more positive note, however, and I'd just like to report that we've had a really great school holiday period so far. This coincided with the shift to orange, of course. Last week was our highest weekly visitation since records began, with 43,000 visitors, and we had over 9,000 visitors on Anzac Day alone. Over the Easter weekend, we had over 24,000 visitors, our highest Easter visitation on record. These high levels of public engagement, driven, helped very much by our new Peter the T-Rex exhibit. Just to remind you, that's free for all Aucklanders, of course. So we've really been helped by that exhibit. After a long period of disruption with the supply chain in international touring exhibits, but we managed to secure that wonderful specimen just in time for the school holidays in the orange setting. And we have a very exciting exhibition program in prospect for the 22-23 year, which is really delivering on our mission to bring the world to Auckland. So in June, we've got ancient Greeks, athletes, warriors and heroes from the British Museum. That opens then. And this is followed by Secrets of Stonehenge at the end of the year, and then a very strong pipeline of acclaimed international exhibitions following that. Of course, we also have the wonderful exhibition of landscape photography of West Auckland's own Olaf Peterson on show right now. Just like to finish by saying thank you for your ongoing support of the museum. As always, we have a standing invitation to you to visit us for a tour behind the scenes. I'm very, very happy to take any questions. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, David, for your comments, and Penny. Great to have you back, almost around the council table here with us. And just an answer to your introductory comment, yeah, the government's just granted $1.4 billion extra for housing infrastructure for our Auckland housing program. So that's probably worth being 4 minutes late to council for. So that was really good. And I have to say, because you're former chair of the Environment Committee and previously the Planning Committee, if you want to see intensification done well and refurbishing our environment, opening up daylighting pipes and making them into beautiful streams, this area of Mount Roskill is a perfect example. So I'll start on that positive note. To the museum, thank you very much for your forbearance. These are tough times for all of us. And David, what you've announced, we're very conscious of, because we are facing exactly those pressures. And our loss of revenue, as I explained to you, is severe with that 900 million gone. But I want to congratulate you. The museum was looking in great shape on Monday morning at 5 a.m, insofar as my eyes were still open. I almost missed Peter the T-Rex, but that was spectacular. And I just want to thank you very sincerely for the fantastic job the museum does on our behalf, and to say that I think our relationship is really good, and that that's reflected in your forbearance and saying, look, we understand council's position this year and we'll forego the levy increase. So thank you very much for that. I have one question, and that's from Councillor Daniel Newman. Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and good morning to you, and good morning to David and to Penny. I'm quite sympathetic to the plight of the museum, actually, in relation. It's a magnificent building. You reflected briefly in your comments about the impact in terms of deferred maintenance and renewal work, but what happens in relation to the cost of capital maintenance if we continue on this path beyond the 2 years, beyond the 2 to 3 years that you've identified? Because clearly what you're effectively doing is a magnificent, iconic building, but the cost of that building must be very, very high. I love going to the museum. Some parts of the museum are really looking fantastic, and other parts you can see that there is a lot of work to be done there. If we go beyond what you've indicated you can sustain for the next year or two, and we continue to undercook the renewals budget for you, what happens to the overall cost of that program? Say in years 3 and 4, it must blow out to a point where it becomes completely financially unsustainable.
Thank you for that question, Councillor. You're right, that analysis is correct. We're being forced, for all sorts of reasons which we've just discussed, to defer critical renewal of key assets, physical assets in the museum, galleries in particular, and of course the heritage building itself. There just isn't the funding in the budget to pursue that program in the way that our asset renewal program prescribes. We're having to slow that program down. And in that process, then it becomes a cumulative problem that we will face down the line. And the museum has always prided itself on keeping on top of asset renewals. It allocates a significant amount of its annual public funding to its depreciation renewal program. And that is because the last thing we want to do is to come back to council and say, hey, we need you to repair our roof. We don't do that. We actually invest year on year in that renewal of what is, I would argue, New Zealand's preeminent heritage building. This year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the competition for the Auckland War Memorial Museum, won by a local Auckland practice from an international competition of 170 entries. This is really one of the most iconic buildings, not only in Auckland, but New Zealand. But it's also extremely expensive, and councillors and the mayor have visited behind the scenes. You've been on the roof, you've seen the challenge that we face in maintaining what is a very, very important, but also expensive piece of cultural infrastructure. So yes, it is a worry, it is a concern for me that that in this situation, and COVID has exposed it, I suppose, that if we don't keep up with the recommended asset renewal program, that's something that's recommended by independent experts as well, and colleagues at other institutions like Heritage New Zealand and all those experts, that we will fall behind, and the costs, of course, accumulate and blow out in the outer years. And we've always tried to avoid that. The museum is, to my knowledge, has never been to council to ask for a bailout for its capital asset renewals. We don't want to do that. We want to invest year on year and manage this asset responsibly and prudently without being in that situation. So I feel it's okay at the moment, but I think there is a real risk going forward that if we don't begin to address that funding base for renewal of the heritage building and the gallery real estate, then the cost will become, perhaps as you describe it, Councillor, unsustainable within the next few years, within that medium-term horizon. That's what we're trying to avoid that's what we're really trying to avoid, because we don't want ratepayers to have to deal with that.
Thank you, David. Second question is Councillor Chris Darby, and then the last question will be with Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you, Mayor. Kia ora, Penny and David and James. Thanks for being in this discussion. Probably either to you, David, or Penny. Can you just comment on the importance of the investment in cultural infrastructure in resetting coming out of COVID, assuming we are coming out of COVID, of course? From a global perspective, what's happening globally in cities? David, you come from UK and European experience with cultural institutions. I'm sure you've stayed well connected with those. I'm aware that a lot of cities are resetting and investing in cultural infrastructure like they are in so-called core infrastructure. In fact, they refer to it as core infrastructure. I wonder if you could just comment on that. And the second part is, I'm aware that Manatū Taonga, Ministry of Arts and Culture, put aside $374 million, and museums didn't get much of a look at that, but have you managed to apply for or access any of that $374 million? Two areas there. Leave it with you, either Penny or David.
If you're okay, Penny, I'll start with a response to your question, Councillor. The first one about the global picture. Yes, we're seeing a major response, not only by local government, by central government, to investment in cultural infrastructure in major centres of population. UK, other European countries, the United States. We're seeing the recognition that the cultural infrastructure is absolutely the anchor for building social cohesion as we come out of the pandemic and rebuilding our economies, rebuilding tourism activity and all of those things, supporting the community, supporting community resilience, all of those positives. Museums and galleries, libraries, other cultural institutions are key to that strategy, and we've seen major investment. We've seen rather fragmentary investment here, as you mentioned, Councillor. There has been a fund for culture through the Ministry of Culture and Cultural Heritage but it's been very hard for museums and galleries in particular to access those funds. We have made several attempts and we've had some successes, but they've been very minor. A lot of the funding has been directed at very small, much smaller institutions than the metros. The metros are always regarded by central government as being well funded and successful and don't require the kind of support that they actually do need. The one exception has been the major investment provided to our counterpart museum, Te Papa in Wellington, which received a multi-million cash investment in recognition of the loss of its tourism revenues. So we've seen some small adjustments and corrections made in the sector, but the major metros of Auckland and Christchurch and Dunedin have really lost out, and that's something that we want to take up with your support, with the Ministry of Cultural Heritage. We want to start a new conversation about how central government should be supporting our institutions going forward, because I think everybody recognises that, you know, from a ratepayer perspective, we're all beginning to run out of road. So that's something that we want to take up with central government, and I look forward to a further conversation with councillors about how we can work together on that case. So I hope that answers makes some response to the two questions you've asked, Councillor.
Thank you.
David, I might just
Councillor,
hop in.
I was going to say Councillor Hulse, Penny Hulse.
Can't help myself, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora, Councillor Darby, and thank you for the really wise question. Just to expand a little bit and very briefly, because I know time is short, on David's comments. Museums around the Motu and internationally are places that people are looking to redress issues post-COVID of social cohesion and social connection. And what we're seeing with another hat on, I've just completed a series of meetings with all 78 councils, and this is a huge issue for discussion. Social cohesion has never been more important, and neither has the discussion on nation building, nationhood, and our role as treaty partners. And this is absolutely the heart of where these discussions happen. Museums are the places, the cultural institutions where these big conversations happen. So to answer the big question, our museum is utterly critical as we rebuild who we are in Auckland, where people feel safe, where they feel socially connected, where they feel seen, and where they feel that some of those key discussions can happen. And we're seeing that. You know, it was very clear in our visitation numbers and in talking to people visiting the museum during the tricky times of COVID, that they actually felt safe there, and it felt like somewhere that families could go and reconnect with each other and reconnect with Roto. So, kia ora. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Penny. And last question from Councillor Angela Dalton, or?
It's been traversed.
It's been done. So I'm going to ask Councillor Al Filipaina to move a vote of thanks for your attendance today with us and for your presentation. And Councillor Chris Fletcher has indicated that she'd like to second that. And I just want to add again my personal thanks for your help and cooperation and the relationship that we're building between our two bodies. I think that's really going in the right direction. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
Aye.
We've got a bit of time delay as we've got some councillors online. I declare that carried, and once again, thank you, James, David and Penny for being in attendance today and the work that you do. Right, we come now to item number 9 on the agenda, with 7. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping.